Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to our Tuesday 11 o'clock live stream here at Coker United Methodist Church. Glad to have y'all with us today, wherever you're joining us, YouTube, coker.org, Facebook. Welcome. We're glad that you are here. My name is Adam Knight. I am the senior pastor here at Coker. Dr. Mark Humphrey, director for music and worship arts, and we're glad to be with you today. This, as we mentioned earlier, is going to be a little bit different from what we've done in the past. This is going to be our final one of these little video casts now for a little while, but then we're going to come back. We've decided this has been fun for us. This has been fun for many of you, you've told us, and so we want to make sure that this is something we keep around. So we're going to kind of get together, talk about what we want this to be long term, how we want it to move forward, and then we'll come back and relaunch with something that is really ready to go. And so we're excited about that. Did you move my chair again?
I didn't, man. I didn't.
I feel low again. So, nevertheless, today what we want to do for our very final one is we want to invite you in to some of the conversations that we're having as a staff, as a task force, on relaunching in-person ministry here at our church. This has become just as hot a topic as all other things, coronavirus and everything. And so, many churches have begun launching. Some launched the first weekend they were able. Others, I know a lot more kind of started this past weekend. Others are going to go this coming weekend. We're still scheduled for a June 7th relaunch in some way, shape, or form. So we have a task force meeting later this afternoon and a staff meeting later this afternoon. We're going to talk through some of these things and continue to put our plan in place. Hopefully you saw the survey that was sent out. We sent it out last Thursday, mentioned it on Sunday. It closes at noon today, so you still have 1 hour. But go to coker.org, click on the coronavirus updates, or on coker.org/events, and you can find that survey there. Take it really quick. It's not long, but you can get your voice out there and let us know some of what you're thinking. And to those of you who have already done that, thank you very much. We've had over 300 responses as of last night. I have not gotten an updated report this morning, but so thank you. That's a fabulous response, and it's very, very helpful for us. So I really do appreciate it. So I want to let you in. I'm going to start here, and you haven't seen this unless you saw it on your social media feed. I want to let you into something, a little bit of my world. What's going on in my world right now? What are some of the things that I am hearing? And so I've got this picture. We're going to put it up on here so that you can see this little picture. There in the middle there, you see pastor, and then you have these bubbles, and these are the various things that they're. This is not mine, by the way. This came from a pastor somewhere in Florida. But, you look at the top there. You can't open the church building yet. It's a huge health risk. You are wrong if you do. And then you see, we need to open the church building. I need to be there and see everyone. What are you waiting for? And then don't ever open the building again. Home is so much better. My family is going to stay home for a while before coming back. Sorry, can't be there. Here are the 25 things you need to do if you want to meet in your building again. My wife, husband, dad, grandparent, uncle, sister, brother, niece just passed away from COVID-19. It's a very real experience for them. It's all a big hoax, a conspiracy, a media frenzy. Read this article, this link. Don't be afraid. Now, and then right in the middle, you have that little pastor bubble.
Head spinning.
That's right. I put that up there to say I saw that on social media, and here was the funny thing. I realized I've had every one of those conversations. Right. Every single one of those things has either been emailed to me, phoned in, text conversation. I've had every one of those conversations with somebody in our church here at Coker. So I show that to you because I want you to have a little bit of a window into some of my world over the last several weeks. And I want to make you this promise here today. I promise you that no matter what we decide to do, it's going to upset someone, okay? No matter how we handle this, some of you are going to be upset. Some of you are going to be disappointed. And that's really the only promise I can make you right now. So, knowing that, I want to start this conversation by saying, would you offer us a little bit of grace in the midst of this? I said it at the beginning of the coronavirus when I was hearing from everybody about whether or not to shut down worship services, how long, blah, 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 all of these things. I've never dealt with this before. Have you ever dealt with this before?
No one has.
No one has ever dealt with this before. There is no playbook for this, okay? There is no playbook for this. And so we are genuinely doing the best we can. And believe me when I say that you all and your safety and your health and the importance of your faith are at the forefront of our thinking as we navigate all of this stuff. And so I can promise you we're going to upset some of you. Other than that, we're just kind of feeling it out as we go.
I always feel like it's good to reassure folks that you might not agree with the decision we make. It might not be the decision that you would have made yourself, but you will hopefully at least be able to acknowledge that we made the best decision we could.
Sure.
We made it as carefully and as thoughtfully as possible with the best information that was at our disposal.
That's exactly right. That's all I'm asking for right there. So, having heard that, I'm just curious, as you think about some of the things that we have to consider and take into consideration as we move forward in all this, what are some of the things that come into your mind?
Well, so I'll follow the trends that we've talked about. You've talked about that you go very kind of small and
Sure.
local,
Yeah.
you know, and for me, I go big historical. And so it has been helpful for me to kind of live in a headspace of just taking in the historical significance of this moment. And I've got a little piece, a little op-ed thing that I've submitted that I'm hoping to get published that we'll share. But and it's entitled "This is some Old Testament stuff." And I think that what's comforting for me right now is because you should know, I mean, we can give this information as well, but one of the primary issues with the safety of gathering is the information regarding singing and transference. Research is fairly clear that there's a lot of potential danger in transmitting the disease by singing, by the deep breathing and all that. So what that means is that even if you gather inside with social distancing, singing, a whole big group of people singing for a while is not safe with what we know right now. So what that means is, you talk about you've never been through this. I've never been through this. Like all of a sudden, my art form is mixed with science and politics and all this kind of, you know what I'm saying? And so that's a fascinating thing. But it's helpful for me in looking back. I was thinking, even the shifts, you know, we talk about the 500-year shift in the church, but also emerging from the worship wars.
Yeah.
The crisis, I mean, you might call it the crisis of singing in contemporary worship, as that's gone down.
And let me just comment here. If you're unfamiliar with the worship wars, that late 90s, early 2000s type of thing, contemporary versus traditional worship, which is valid, which isn't, all those sorts of things.
Because you would be right to say which worship wars.
Yeah.
Could you be more specific, please?
Exactly.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking, like, so it was that, then there's this kind of crisis of people not singing, even though the bands are sounding better and the music is, you know, in terms of pop quality is better. You know, there's this growing disconnect in contemporary worship and traditional worship shrinking. So there's been this kind of crisis of singing happening. Why aren't people singing? I mean, you see so many articles about it. And now people aren't singing because of health. And I'm of the mindset right now of saying, first of all, with the risk and with it being something that I know so many people who love to sing and it's such an important part of their lives, and I have presided over and provided music for many of the funerals of people who have loved to sing. I have no interest in doing that with anything related to a decision that I would make. So there's a certain kind of like, these are my people. So there's that. But then also I find myself, when I talk about Old Testament, just like leaning into diasporas, the thought of diasporas, of plagues, of fasting, of being like, instead of fighting against, singing, all this kind of thing, but just like step back from it for a bit, 20,000 feet and saying, what might be the lesson in this for me?
Yeah.
Like, what's the head space? What's the heart space? What's that still small voice saying? Isn't this interesting? That for whatever reason, whether you want to call it God, the universe, or history, or whatever, has decided, like, don't sing. You can't sing. That's fascinating to me.
Well, so one of the conversations that started very early in all of this was the conversation over Holy Communion.
Yeah, right.
And whether or not Holy Communion can happen online. And so this was several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago. The United Methodist Church formed a study commission
Right.
because that's what we do. And they studied online communion. Is this something that is doable? And what we're talking about is the sacred nature of the sacrament, presiding over the table, consecration of elements, all the things that make it a true sacrament in our tradition, meaning that it is something that the Holy Spirit plays a part in. We aren't just taking common elements after the consecration. The very real presence of Jesus is there. Not in a transubstantiation nature like Catholicism, where we say it's the actual body and blood. Right. No. But the presence of Jesus is actually there in the elements. That's our theology of Holy Communion. That's what makes it a sacrament. Other traditions have an ordinantal view, which means that it is something you do simply because Jesus said to do it. And so you take the bread and you take the cup, but there's no real spiritual significance in the elements. It is more of just a practice of remembering. Yeah. So those are the differences there. So the study commission was saying, well, can this work online if you don't have the consecration and all of this stuff? They eventually came back and said, there's still a lot more study that needs to be done right now. We're not comfortable with it. And so we said, okay, well then online communion is not going to work. When all this started up and we got to the first communion Sunday, everybody started going, oh no. Yeah. And there was this huge conversation about it again. And so there were a lot of people who said, well, this then is a calling of a time to fast from the sacrament. We can't do this in the way that our understanding is. Right. And so we're being called to fast from this thing that we view as very necessary. I think that's a valid interpretation, a valid course of action. It was not one that I agreed with. I decided that given in a perfect world, when gathering is the preferred and main method, yes, this is the way it needs to be done. Online communion doesn't work that way. But when you eliminate this entire variable of gathering personally, my sacramental theology is high enough that I go, the Holy Spirit can work through these means. If we can't gather, I believe that the Holy Communion is so important that that's something that we need to do. And so we did online communion. Right. And we gave instruction as if you watch the online service later, when we're not doing the actual consecration, then here's an option for a love feast. Because again, I'm trying to stay within the bounds of sacramental theology, but also understand the current moment. And so you come fast forward now, and we're into a new one, singing. I believe singing is theologically key to a worship gathering. But when there's a potential risk, is that something that we fast from for a time? I don't hold singing as high as the sacrament. Right. And so now I start going, okay, well then maybe fasting for a time of my physical singing is something that's doable.
Physical singing in a room. Now keep in mind, we're still fasting from, with regards to communion, we're still fasting from intinction.
Correct.
I mean, so there are ways in which, so there are certain things that we're saying, well, we're not going to do that. And so,
But maybe I could enjoy listening to the music in the room.
Right.
Where it's not a complete abandonment of it altogether. So I share all that to simply say these are the things that are rolling around. I've said this before. We do things here because of something we believe. We don't simply do them because that's what churches do. So there's a theology, there's a drive that leads to a practice then. And so these things that seem like easy solutions are not, because they dive down into why you do this and what is the significance of it, what is the value of it. And when you really start digging, then you have to start making some hard decisions when you're talking about health, safety, all of those sorts of things.
And the other decision we're having to make is if you're, after having not gathered, after having not been in this room and hearing the organ and seeing the stained glass and seeing one another, even if you're 6 feet away, the question is, and this is going to be something we'll have to experience it as we go, is what is it like to be sitting in this room, to have a hymn playing from the organ, me singing it, which is what we will be sending out online, but you being told you can't sing while we do that. And what's that experience going to be like? Because one of the considerations we're wondering about is, would that be such a difficult experience in the room that we pre-record the hymn, that where if you're at home, you don't know that it's, it's been pre-recorded and you get the same experience. But yet when you're in the room, we're not going to kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, dangle that carrot in front of you to say like, yeah, because, I mean, what is that? Will that feel even more, a different kind of pain from now we can finally gather again? But, that's just
that's exactly right.
Tricky thing.
It is tricky. And so these are all of the things that we're trying to figure out and we're trying to think about. Brandon, are you back there? Would you come over to the camera here for just a second? I've got a reason for doing this, don't worry. I want you to know that we are putting several things in place. We are following the CDC recommendations for faith communities. We also have the recommendations and guidelines from the Attorney General in the state of Texas for faith communities. We are merging all of these things to put into practice the social distancing requirements to be able to come back. Brandon, could you pan the camera just around the sanctuary a little bit so you can see some of the orange tape and things like that? So we're closing off the two farthest wings all together. But you'll see here in the middle, you'll see the different pews and whatnot, and the tape where we've taped off rows where no one will be allowed to sit. But then there's an open row. And then you can see blue tape on the back. David Barnes has gone through and measured 6 feet across a pew. So as a for instance here, and I'm going to get up and walk over here. So Brandon, keep coming this way. I'm going to show you a for instance just real quick. This back pew right here, this is the back pew in the center section of our sanctuary. It's the largest pew that we have in this entire section. You could get a family down there, a family of 3 or 4, and a family of 3 or 4 down here, and have 6 foot in the middle. So in our largest pew, you can only really get 2 families. That's going to be the max. And then it gets smaller, of course, as it goes forward, because these pews get smaller as well. You will notice in the very back there, we don't have the tape up yet, but we are using that as our mobility impaired section. So if you have mobility impairment and you're planning on coming to worship, we're going to have you back there because we can remove the entire row. Those are movable pews, so we can take it out so you can easily get in and out back there. You'll notice up at the front here, some of our movable pews and whatnot are just gone so that we don't have to, that just helps us with the distancing and everything of that nature as well. So I wanted you to get a look at the sanctuary a little bit of just so that you'll see what it is that some of the stuff that we're dealing with. The curtaining behind us and behind Valerie that's a part of our worship on Sunday morning so that you don't see the empty seats and everything, that's going to stay. That's going to continue to be there. But I want you to have the visual of some of the things that we're putting in place right now. We're going to have a single entry and a one-way into the sanctuary, and we're going to have a single exit and a one-way out of the sanctuary. Those are the best practices that the CDC and the Attorney General have given to us. That limits the amount of time or congregating that can happen by moving people in and out orderly in one-way fashion so that, again, all that can happen. So I want to show you that, and I want to outline that because we got a lot of things we have not determined yet. We have not made final determinations on singing and which services and all of these things. We've not made final determinations on times, on lots of things. We're still working through all of that. But I want you to see some of the things that have already been put in place and explain to you some of the processes. The ushers are going to meet you outside. They're going to ask you to sanitize your hands. If you don't have a mask, we're going to have a mask here for you and hand it and ask you to wear the mask when you come in. All of those things in place so that again, you know some of the things that we're talking about and that we're putting in place, but B, you realize it's not going to be like the last time you walked into this sanctuary. It's going to be a very different kind of an experience.
You might want to mention, too, the other gatherings that we're going to be
talk about that.
Yeah. Because one of the questions we've been kind of asking ourselves is, given the limitations on what can happen on a Sunday morning in this room, what are the felt needs that we have right now? And we know that one of those is gathering, just seeing one another. And we also know that one of those is singing together. And so one of the things we've talked about is we just did the first one on last Sunday night. We're going to do this again coming up. Abraham led with his guitar right to the parking lot, and then we're going to have the full band this week. And we've talked about potential of like some hymn sings and even maybe some outdoor concert kinds of things, ways for people to gather, but that are safer. Obviously, it's too bad with the weather starting to get hot. Well, so we're going to kind of take that into consideration. But still, just know that that's another thing that we're exploring. And this is a real, this is a cultural kind of a shift for us, because we, churches are kind of, we tend to prioritize a Sunday morning worship gathering. It's kind of like that. There's that. That's our,
right.
Kind of starting point. But for us right now, we're realizing that answering the question of how do we gather, or how is the church in this time, is going to require that we rethink what that Sunday morning looks like and what we bring around it right now.
Lots of the comments that we've gotten in the survey results are talking about just the need to see other people, the need to be with other people, to talk, even if we've got to sit 6 feet apart, to just talk to someone else, even if we're wearing a mask, to physically be present with them for encouragement, for community, all of those things. I love that. I get that. And there might be better places for that than Sunday morning worship right now. And so even while we work toward returning in here for that time, we're going to be continuing to do other things and trying to find other ways for us all to get together safely, for us all to get together in outside. Everything we're hearing from the CDC and other places right now are saying that outside is not nearly as big a problem as inside. When you're talking about recycled air, when you're talking about things like that, proximity and whatnot. So we are blessed with a lot of land and a park and all sorts of areas, a lot of trees, a lot of shade. So we're going to make use of all of that over the next several weeks as we do that. It probably bears mentioning at this point as well that what we're talking about right now, specifically in June, is a return to Sunday morning worship and worship only. We're not talking about a return for Sunday school just yet, for children's and youth programming just yet, for nursery just yet, those things. I'm wanting to work in kind of 2-week increments. Again, this has not been finalized or decided, but I kind of want to say, okay, well, let's do this for 2 weeks. And then after that, let's reassess. And then maybe we can add this, And so that just gives you some of my thought processes there and things. So what you hear come out later this week about June 7th, just know that my thinking there is going to be about June 7th and June 14th. And then we'll reassess and see what we do after that.
Well, we have to keep in mind, too, that as that is happening, I mean, it's almost, think about how time moves right now in terms of, even though the days can feel long, the evolving information about this disease and the situation moves very rapidly. I mean, imagine what happens in 2 weeks. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is, as we are moving through the month of June and July, the whole world is going to be undergoing this worship experiment.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be, because there will be a range of different approaches to it, there are going to be a range of different, unofficial and some official studies. I should reference University of Colorado Boulder has just started what I think is going to be the most, at least at this point, the most comprehensive peer-reviewed study with regards to this. Now, it's just started, but with that in mind, there's going to be emerging information as this progresses that we're going to have, benefit of that we don't have right now.
I am in regular conversation with other United Methodist pastors, particularly Northern Hills United Methodist Church and University United Methodist Church, as well as Laurel Heights United Methodist Church and several others here in our community. Wayside Chapel is a church that I'm in communication with their pastor as well from outside the Methodist tradition. First Presbyterian, we have some communication with them. And so we are talking with others and find out, because everybody's on a different timeline. Everybody's doing things a little bit different. And so, I'm I told a couple of them, I'm going to let y'all be the guinea pigs on a few of these things. And then I'll take from your learnings on a couple of them as well. So we're trying to gather best practices. You talked about the science always changing, because that's the nature of science. As you learn more, the CDC just came out late last week to say, hey, we've just figured out this isn't necessarily passed through touching surfaces
Yeah, right.
and things like that. And so, wow, okay, that's great, because for a long time we were all
Yeah, that
walking
was the
around
biggest
and
deal.
everything
Yeah,
was,
right.
okay, so the science is now telling us, hey, there's a new learning right there. Damon Relder, associate pastor here, is a former scientist, a biologist, and he was telling me just this week, listen, this is going to continue to change.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of science. The more you learn, the more you study, the more results you're going to have. And so,
And this is a brand new thing. This particular disease
exactly
is a brand
right.
new thing that has issues that we've never encountered before.
so the last thing that I would say is this. We've talked about over the last several weeks, the number of things in our world that are just automatically politicized.
Yeah.
This has now become one of those things.
Yep.
You don't hear about what a state is doing without hearing that the governor of that state is either Republican or Democrat. It's just amazing to
Right.
me, as though that
Right.
in many cases had anything to do with it. I don't know. But nevertheless, this has become so politicized. And then last week, there was a lot of talk about churches and about churches reopening, and the president said some things, and that all just really got to going. So I just wanted to simply say this. I've never made a decision in leading my church based on something the government has told me to do. Primarily because never in my life has the government tried to step in and tell a church what to do.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear about something. We didn't stop doing worship in mid-March live because the government asked us to. We stopped because we were trying to be a good neighbor. We were trying to be a good neighbor to others in San Antonio, to our own congregants who we realized were a vulnerable population, all of those things. That was not motivated by a government edict or anything like that. And in talking about trying to come back, it's the same thing.
Sure.
There's not a single person that attends this church whose life is expendable. Not one. And so when I think about the numbers of people that we have in our congregation that are part of that vulnerable population, that weighs heavy on me. If you think that I am sleeping regularly and eating regularly while trying to make these decisions, you're wrong. And so that is something that just weighs extremely heavy on me in trying to make all these decisions. So I share that with you so that you don't need to, email me or something to me and say, well, you're doing this because the government, or you're not doing this because of this person or what. None of that is true. None of that is true. I go back to what I said at the beginning. We are trying to do as well as we can with the information that we have and our desire to lead you in what we believe is a faithful way forward, trusting in God's provision.